Well, the first sentence is true, surprisingly, because he's always been saying that he's in talk with the Iranians, he's talking with the guards, he's talking with someone. Maybe he's talking with me, maybe my children. I don't know, but he's always talking with someone. But for the first time, he's acknowledged what the Iranians have been saying all along, that no, we're not in talks with the United States. We're not in talks with Trump. So that part is true, and there are no plans for any talks because the talks have already taken place. We've had two series of negotiations. One was in Pakistan. There was supposed to be a ceasefire, and then Netanyahu carpet bombed Lebanon and Beirut in particular, wrecked that ceasefire, and then the siege began. And then, of course, we had the MOU and the negotiations that took place over the implementation of the MOU. Trump immediately wrecked the MOU. He violated Articles 1, 2, 3. I mean, he just, the list goes on. He refused to hand over Iranian stolen assets. He refused to force the Israeli regime out of Lebanon, which was his commitment. He went and set up his own corridor in the Strait of Hormuz in violation of Article 5. And so that fell apart. And since then, we haven't had any direct talks again, and there are no plans to have talks. The Iranians have said, Dr. Ghalibaf today has said that until the Strait of Hormuz until the U.S. Implements its obligations in accordance with the MOU, the Strait of Hormuz is going to remain closed. Well, those are the demands, and there's nothing to talk about effectively.
Well, and for those who may have missed it, Gary, let's go a little out of order here. Here is what was reported on Fox News today that Mr. Ghalibaf said. Okay, so that's basically a constant condensation of all the points of the 14-point memorandum of understanding. But now then, what seems to be very different is he's saying all of them have to be done up front, or Iran is not going to open up the Strait of Hormuz. Is that pretty much the way the view is now?
Yeah, I think so, because last time round, we began to implement the deal, and we saw that Trump was stalling. And so there were negotiations about negotiating over Iranian stolen assets. The U.S. lifted the sanctions on Iranian oil exports for a few days, then reversed it. In Lebanon, nothing was happening except for the fact that the Israelis were just killing fewer people, but they continued the occupation. So, and of course, the MOU says Lebanon and all other fronts, and the other fronts include Gaza and Yemen and Iraq, something which I've been saying from the beginning, but now the Iranians are being more explicit about it. They're saying very openly, the statement of the chair of the Supreme National Security Council a week or two ago, I think, said that the fronts are Palestine, Yemen, and Iraq. In other words, the genocide in Gaza has to end completely, and the Israeli regime has to pull back. So the Iranians are very explicit now. In the MOU, some things were a bit vague. Now the Iranians are spelling out what they mean exactly by the MOU.
Okay, so that's going to lead to some pretty troublesome questions that would naturally follow on before that. Before I ask one, let me show you where President Trump is. This was from the Oval Office yesterday, where he's talking about how he sees the Strait of Hormuz and this blockade that he has. Yeah, I'm going to circle back to that unless we do something different in just a second. But let's look first of all at the Strait. He's claiming that we have complete control over it and that we're getting oil out millions of barrels. Now, I think as you and I discussed earlier this week, or maybe towards the last of last week, that according to the Energy Secretary Wright, that there is like 7 to 9 million barrels, sometimes up to 10 or 20 million barrels a day going through there. That's not exactly validated by like Kepler and some of these other tracking systems, but they do say that there's something somewhere around 5 to 7 going through. But they say most of that is still going through on the approved corridor from the Iranian side. What can you tell us from the Iranian perspective? How do they see the Strait of Hormuz, and is Iranian oil getting out?
Well, obviously the fishing boats or the drug boats or whatever they are that they've been striking in the Gulf of Mexico or the Caribbean or the Gulf of America or whatever it is nowadays is not having its the desired impact, because he's definitely taking something when he says that the numbers that are going out of the Persian Gulf are much smaller than what he claims, and the some of the oil is going through the Iranian corridor, and those are friendly to Iran, countries that did not take part in the war against Iran. Some oil is going through the uh, the, the south alongside the Omani coastline. And the reason for that largely is because of some mini deals that the Iranians have with, for example, the Emirates. The Emirates do some things for Iran, the Iranians do some things for them. It could change next week, it could change tomorrow, but that these sort of mini deals exist. And sometimes a tanker may be afraid to use the Iranian corridor, and the Iranians may agree to allow them to go from the south so that they don't get harassed by the Americans. So, but the amount of oil that gets through is very limited. And then, of course, it's not just oil, as you know better than I. It's sulfur, it's helium, it's all these petrochemical goods, it's aluminum, it's all the things that are produced in the Persian Gulf. It is the fertilizers, and these are causing huge, and it's also the refineries that no longer are exporting from the Persian Gulf, which contributes to the global market. So, for example, right now, the fuel shortages that exist, they are partially due to the shutdown in the Persian Gulf, partially due to the Ukrainian strikes on Russia, and so on. So,
Right.
while there's a decline in oil on the market, there's also a decline in refined goods because of the closure of the Persian Gulf and because of the war in Ukraine. So, he can say what he wants, but reality is not going to go anywhere. And I think just as Trump has been saying for weeks now, many weeks, that the Strait of Hormuz is open. Everything is fine. But when you say everything is fine every day, and when you say they have no Navy, no Air Force, no military every day for months, obviously it means that there is a problem. If I every day have to tell you, all is well, don't worry, everything is fine, don't worry about me, that means I'm having problems. Otherwise, I wouldn't have to say it every day.
UK in particular, in recent days, those things are going to continue on. Now, here's one of the many problems. Now, Trump said at the end of that last soundbite there that unless we do something different, implying that I can fix this militarily if I want to. This is his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who was also talked on Fox News yesterday about, look, here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to be reasonable with the Iranian side. Well, I mean, if he's looking for something that makes sense to us, and we had the MOU signed, and then we didn't abide by almost any of the terms, then, I mean, this is probably a rhetorical question, but I'll ask it anyway. What motivation would Iran ever have to talk to him to find a deal that's good for us?
Iran sees him as Netanyahu's spokesman, and as basically the Netanyahu representative in the White House. And so he's taken more seriously than Trump. I mean, in Iran, they don't really take Trump seriously. And I think, in the past, whenever Trump would say something, it would make the news in Iran. But during the last 3-4 months, I think gradually we've been seeing that decrease over time. So, for example, if Trump right now does a Truth Social, posts a Truth Social that says, I'm going to obliterate Iran, I don't think it's going to be even discussed over dinner in anyone's home because he said it so many times. So Kushner for Iran is taken much more seriously. But the problem is that Kushner is basically an Israeli asset. He's an Israeli firster. And he's not serious about wanting to solve the problem. So when he says President Trump, he really means President Netanyahu. And President Netanyahu does not want peace. President Netanyahu does not want to end the crisis. President Netanyahu wants the crisis to continue, especially since he has a very dangerous situation right now with regards to the elections. If he loses the elections, he's in serious trouble at a personal level. So the belief here is that the United States isn't serious. And by the way, and I know your audience knows this, but Iran, there's absolutely no evidence at all that Iran has ever pursued a nuclear weapon. Even the United States admits that until after 2003, Iran was not producing weapons. But that before 2003 is still nonsense. The International Atomic Energy Agency, which has been monitoring the Iranian nuclear program, it has been in Iran for years, especially after 2015, carrying out intrusive inspections, really intrusive inspections that go far beyond anything that I would have approved of if I was the chief negotiator. And they found nothing to indicate that Iran was producing a nuclear, was moving to produce a nuclear weapon. So that is just a myth that they use. There are a couple of good books in this regard. One is Gareth Porter's A Manufactured Crisis, and the other is Peter Oborn's A Dangerous Delusion. If people are interested, these two books are very good books to read and understand how this whole crisis began. But this crisis was basically used as a tool to marginalize Iran. And the reason was because Iran was supporting the Palestinians. That is it, basically. So if it's one day it's human rights, one day it's a nuclear program, one day it's, I don't know, animal rights, one day it's going to be something else, terrorism. But it's the root of the problem is that Iran supports the Palestinians, and of course the West supports the Israelis. And I'm sure you heard the latest statements where the senior Israeli official has said we should kill, I think, 30 or 40 Palestinians a night in Gaza because these people are just not human. And this is the equivalent of the head of the U.S. FBI saying, yeah, well, let's kill 30 or 40 people every night because they're not human. And what would the reaction be in the United States among ordinary Americans if that was said? But by the head of the FBI about Mexicans or Canadians, but it doesn't get any news you don't see it on Fox News, you don't see it on CNN, you don't see it in the Washington Post or the New York Times. But he's openly calling for the extermination of the Palestinian people.
Yeah, that is something I lament greatly, and was grieved when I saw that. All of this leads to a bigger problem that we have here, though. If President Trump, and by the way, was also right on his comment about the blockade that we have. It is, no kidding, causing real problems for the Iranian side, as you've told on our show here before. So there's no doubt about that. But if he's looking, as Jared Kushner just talked about there, for a deal that there's no communication, as he himself this time said, that means that we're just in a suspended animation state of two blockades. Both sides are hurting. But then where are we going to go? Secondly, what is the Iranian side going to do? Because if Ghalibaf is saying on television in Iran that until America does everything from the MOU, we're not going to release ours. President Trump said he's not going to release his until everything that he gets his way, which is not going to happen. So that either means the blockades will go on indefinitely and everybody will suffer, or somebody's going to take some preventive action. Where we go? I think it was the Wall Street. That's the wrong one. I may have gotten rid of that one by mistake. Wall Street Journal was reporting that Iran may be actually preparing to go back to war itself to resolve the blockade. What can you tell us?
Well, a number of things, I think. One is that, first of all, just as a footnote, Reuters definitely does not have access to any senior Iranian official. Senior Iranian officials do not speak to Reuters. And Reuters fabricates this sort of thing a lot. And so does the New York Times. No senior Iranian official ever speaks to Reuters or the New York Times. So what they do is they usually pick up information, unless it's just fabricated, from Iranian sources, the Iranian media, which says these things, and then they say some official told them. But it is true, Iran's military posture has changed from defense to offense, not its military doctrine. Iran's military doctrine is defensive, but with regards to U.S. aggression, Israeli regime aggression, the Iranians are now going to be more assertive, and they're going to be on the offense. That is, I think, something that has become clear with the new chair in the Supreme National Security Council, Major General Mohsen Rezai's appointment, and the statements that he's been making. How will this be carried out? I don't know, but I think that there's no doubt that Iran is going to be much tougher in all respects when it wants to deal with the United States. So, for example, in the MOU, we signed the MOU. Iran really didn't expect the Americans to implement it, but it was a test. But it was clear that Trump had no intention of respecting his own signature. So as soon as the MOU was signed, he just wanted the Strait to be open to ease the energy crisis, and then he wanted to undermine Iran's control over the Strait of Hormuz by setting up his own corridor with the help of the Saudis, the Qataris, and the Kuwaitis, which the Iranians said, we're not going to let that happen. So things fell apart. So for Iran, the reason why they're saying that the Americans have to do these things up front from now on is because Trump cannot be trusted. He won't do it unless he's forced to do so. And so the MOU is still the MOU, but the Iranians are saying that Trump has to act first, and then we will act, because we will open the Strait of Hormuz if he carries out his obligations. And, it's really extraordinary that stopping the genocide in Gaza should be an excessive demand, or ending the Israeli occupation of Lebanon should be an excessive demand, or that Iran's assets that have been stolen are excessive demands. These are all quite normal. If it was any other negotiator in Iran, or not any other, but many people were saying that the MOU was not enough. I know that some of our mutual friends on your show have been saying that the MOU was a capitulation. But in Iran, that's not how it's seen. Many Iranians are saying that we let Trump off the hook. We should have pressed harder. We should have forced him to give real concessions instead of a piece of paper. And the negotiators are under a lot of fire for negotiating in this way. Now, I'm neither here nor there. Both sides have an argument to make. But in any case, the Iranians are not going to accept Trump going back to the MOU, and then Iran opening up the Strait, and then waiting for Trump to do something which it knows he won't do if he's not forced to do so.
And so then I guess really the question is, where are we going to go from here? Because there was some also some reporting out earlier today that really both sides, some elements on both sides were just saying, hey, we're just going to use the MOU to rearm, refit, rest up, and then get ready for the next round. Is going to go back. Now, that would be, and I'm just taking off my American hat here, just looking at this militarily. From a military perspective, the Iranian side would have a more plausible path to go back and do that, because conditions are not. And then, of course, there's the issue of all the things you mentioned a minute ago with the ammonia, with the sulfur, the helium, even the oil and gas. I mean, just that part too. The longer this goes on, the more it could cripple our entire way of life. I mean, with the depression, especially if it gets that far, and if we go on enough months, it almost can't have any impact other than that. But the Iranian side, and you've said this many times on our show, and we've shown, you can just look at the function, even if it under a constrained environment like the blockade, you could probably go, I would almost say indefinitely, certainly in an extended period of time. We can maybe go another few months, I think, before we get into trouble. So there's two courses of action, or two schools of thought, rather. Iran could just sit back and say, yeah, we'll let the dueling blockades go. We'll suck down the pain here and we'll see how far you can go. And then the other school of thought says, because of all these things and all these, and we can add in the shortage of interceptor missiles, shortage of offensive missiles, at least the ones that can be fired from long range, and say, yeah, why don't you fire the ones that you have to get closer to our borders, like with the JDAMs and small diameter bombs and some of these other missiles that require more risk for our Air Force, and say we're going to precipitate an attack that will cripple you militarily and economically. I mean, that's my concern. How is that viewed in Iran? What's the arguments there?
Well, one thing I should again point out, and I know your audience recognizes this, but the Iranians were very serious about the MOU. If the United States, if Trump was serious about carrying out his obligations, the Iranians would have, by now, the Strait of Hormuz would have been normalized. And this is not the first time. Again, after the 40-day war, when they were negotiating in Pakistan, there was supposed to be a ceasefire deal, and Netanyahu wrecked it. And then Trump, even though Lebanon was part of the ceasefire arrangement, Trump ultimately bowed to Netanyahu and sided with him and said, well, Lebanon is not included, even though it was obviously part of it. Even the mediators said that. And the mediators were, the Pakistani government is very close to the United States. So the Iranians, while they were serious, they know that the Americans were not serious, and they know that the Americans right now are not serious. So the Iranians have no option but to continue fighting, because they know that if they say, okay, let's accept a ceasefire, that Trump is going to be deceitful, he'll cheat Iran, he'll undermine Iran. And so it would be a very foolish move by any Iranian leader to say, okay, you're imposing pressure on the Iranian people, let's have a ceasefire. Trump will use that. I mean, he doesn't care about his own signature. He'll use that to undermine Iran. So right now, the Iranians really have no option but to go full steam ahead. They say, okay, you put pressure on us, we will increase the pressure on you. You increase the pressure on us, we will increase the pressure on you. And also, we should take this into account, that the Iranians are preparing themselves for war. And Iran is much more capable of producing missiles, and new drones than the Americans are in producing their own missiles or their own anti-missile defense systems, for reasons that you know much better than I. You're an expert in this area. I'm not. But the Iranians are expanding their underground bases. They're expanding their command and control centers. They're developing new technology, their missiles. We've seen how during the 13 days of fighting, the missiles and the drones were more effective than even during the 40-day war. And during the 40-day war, they were more effective than the 12-day war. So Iran is evolving, Iran is progressing, it's advancing, its missiles and drones are getting better as time goes on, while the United States is facing a crisis. So Iran knows that if we go to war, the Americans can hit us hard. Trump can hit Iran hard, but Iran can hit back. And when the United States runs out of those critical weapon systems, Iran will still have missiles and drones. And if the United States goes after Iran's critical infrastructure, Iran will take out everything in the region. Because all of these countries are basically proxies of the United States. They are co-conspirators against Iran. And once that happens, a global economic depression is assured, because then no one can manipulate the market anymore. No one can say, well, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, something will happen. When people see images of oil fields on fire and LNG refineries on fire, then they'll know it's over. And then millions of people will have to leave the Arabian Peninsula, and the map will change. Everything will change. So, I mean, hopefully we'll never get there, but it increasingly does look like that is a strong possibility. But even if that doesn't happen, there doesn't seem to be any light at the end of the tunnel for now. So both sides are going to put the pressure on and make life worse for everyone across the world. But the difference between Iran and the United States is that the Iranians know that if they submit, if they accept Trump's demands, then the country is finished.
Yeah.
And so ordinary Iranians are going to be resilient. But the American people, they know that this is war. This is a war for Netanyahu. This is Kushner's war. This is Witkoff's war. This is the Israeli Firsters war. This is not for the American people. In fact,
that much is clear.
I spoke about this before on your show, a very good book, Going to Tehran, which I really advise everyone to read, by Flint and Hillary Mann-Leverett. These were two people who worked in the White House. They were saying in a decade ago, more than a decade ago, I mean, in the book, they discuss many of the myths about Iran that we hear in the West, but they were saying that this war is going to be inevitable unless the United States changes its policy towards Iran. And right now, they've been prophetic in their prediction. We are, but what I believe right now is that there are two routes to take from here. One is where things gradually get worse and much worse, and another is where things get very bad very suddenly. But Trump has closed the door to any other option. So one is a siege where the world is starved of helium and sulfur and LNG and fuel and so on, and the other is all the plants in the Persian Gulf region are destroyed.
And that is the question about which path is it going to go down, because I actually had a comment here from a certain individual that claims to have some knowledge that suggests that Iran may be getting ready to initiate one of those two scenarios, probably a slower ramp up within potentially days, if President Trump doesn't do something along the lines of what Ghalibaf was saying. What do you think about that?
Well, one of the things that the Iranians are saying is that there's no ceasefire. We're not in a ceasefire. So what does that mean? If we're not in a ceasefire, that means that we can shoot whenever we want. The Americans can shoot whenever we want. So that basically means that if the Iranians fire missiles, they can say, I mean, just remember I know you remember, but after the 13 days when the Americans restarted the war, after Trump tore up the MOU, when the United States stopped, to my surprise, Iran didn't. Iran struck key U.S. targets in Jordan in particular, but also in Kuwait and Bahrain. So I was a bit surprised that the Iranians continued. The Iranians wanted to tell the United States that you don't dictate terms. You don't dictate the terms of engagement from now on. And right now, when the Iranians are saying that there is no ceasefire, basically, to me, that sounds like they're saying we could attack whenever we want. We are capable of attacking. We have the right to attack whenever we want, especially since siege warfare is warfare. So that, I think, the comment that your friend made is a very valid point. I don't know if Iran is going to go down that route, but there are many ways that you can go down that road without actually doing it directly. One is provoking the other side to begin a war. So the Iranians could actually do something to push Trump to initiating a war, or a restart of the hot war, so that the Iranians could retaliate. But one difference that we see now that didn't exist in the past is that we now see for the first time the axis of resistance beginning to become more directly involved, especially Yemen. In the case of Iraq, they were involved to a degree in the past. But now we see Yemen being far more active. And even as we speak, Yemen is not pushing nearly as hard as it could. So it is hitting the Saudis very hard, both in the Red Sea, its oil installations, but also its troops and its proxies inside Yemen. And they're being very effective. So it's clear that they have a lot of power. And then there's the resistance in Iraq, which ultimately, if push comes to shove, I think this time around, they are going to be very different than before. So we have a different situation than we had during the 40-day war. And ultimately, I think that I don't see any path to victory for Trump, to be very blunt, even though I'm obviously not at all sympathetic to Trump or his entourage or the Zionists. I despise Zionism, but I don't see any path to victory. And I think ultimately Iran is destined to overcome. It may be very painful. The United States may attack Iran, target its key infrastructure, and we may have great difficulty in the months ahead or the next 2-3 years. But the same is going to happen to the rest of the world. You don't have, if the oil and gas installations and all the other things that we discussed are destroyed, it'll be like the entire world being bombed. The factories don't have to be bombed to become useless. They just shut down. And that will happen across the world.
Right. Yeah. If we get to the worst scenario, we'll have to see that. One of the things I'm concerned about, you mentioned the PMF in Iraq. I continue to see anecdotal reporting and some direct inferences that if things completely fall apart, it's not just missile fire we may see, but the PMF allegedly could move on Kuwait. What do you think of that? Is that something you think is legitimate, or is that overblown?
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. First of all, the Iraqis have always believed that Kuwait was a part of Iran. And I don't think Iran has any problem with that at all. And so if they enter Kuwait, Iran is not going to complain, obviously. And there's nothing that Kuwait can do about it. And they can go further than Kuwait. And this is not 1990 or 1991. The world has changed. There's nothing that the United States would be able to do about it.
Right.
And the global situation is just we're living in a different universe, sort of. In fact, I've always said, I mean, I've been saying for many years, not always, but I've been saying for many years that two events took place in the 1990s that were like a curse upon the United States. One was the fall of the Soviet Union, and the other was the U.S. victory in Kuwait. Because the United States, before the collapse of the Soviet Union and before its victory in Kuwait, was much more cautious and much more level-headed in its approach to international affairs. But after that, it became utterly arrogant, foolish. Then later we saw the endless wars. Now, how those wars began and what was 9/11 all about, that aside. But the United States became rogue, and within 3 decades, or let's say 3.5 decades, the United States is a much diminished power today as a result. So I think that these two great victories for the United States were actually two curses that undermined the country. And the problem that the United States has today, and I'm not talking about ordinary people. I think ordinary Americans are very realistic. They see the war, they see the genocide in Gaza, and they're opposed to it. Why? Because ordinary Americans are decent people. When they see the facts, even though social media is trying to hide them, when they see the facts, they deal with it in a moral way, just like everyone else in the world. But the elites in the United States, they still think, in my opinion, but you would know better if I'm wrong, tell me, I think they still think they're in the 1990s. This is
I say that all the time. I say this is not 1992 anymore, but yet we act like it is. So that's a common theme that we have actually here on our show. I want to ask, I know we're running a little bit low on time here. What can you tell us about what's going on between Iran and Oman? President Trump came out yesterday, I think it was, and said that he will blow the S out of them if they get in the way and if they don't do what he's telling them to do behind the scenes. And it seemed about a week ago that Iran and Oman had at least come to a general understanding of how the strait was going to be administered, but that keeps not being made public. And it was this morning they again implied that it was about to be public, but it still hasn't, which tells me that there's still tremendous pressure, diplomatic pressure, political pressure, economic pressure being put on Oman from the U.S. side, but that they're not yet giving into that. What can you tell us about what's happening in that dynamic?
Well, I was told about a week ago, or maybe 10 days ago, a week ago, I'm not quite sure when, that there was a general agreement between Iran and Oman. And basically the negotiations were over. But then it turned out that there were some issues that the two sides, when they went back to their capitals, felt that needed to be further negotiated. And so we don't have a deal. So I've been saying on in different places that there is a deal, but which is true. I mean, I was told just this morning or yesterday. Sorry, I was told yesterday because the person who told me that the negotiations had succeeded and they were literally over. I told him, well, you told me this is how it was. He said, yes, that's how it was a week ago, 10 days ago. But when they went back to the two sides went back to their capitals, they saw that there were still issues that needed to be resolved. So the issues are not completely resolved, but obviously Trump is making those threats against Oman for a reason. And that's because Iran is demanding that the agreement between Iran and Oman must contain two things. One is that Iran must have oversight over ships that enter and ships that leave the Persian Gulf. The second is that fees shall be taken for whatever reason: environmental protection, insurance, maintenance, whatever. But Iran will take fees. So now, what the details are, what the current differences are, I don't know. I'm not involved, and I don't know the details. But obviously, when Trump is threatening to do so and so to Oman, that means that he's threatening them not to accept Iran's terms. But if Oman doesn't, then we're not going to have an agreement. And if we don't have an agreement, then we cannot have an agreement on anything else within the framework of the.
And do you know that in the conversations with Oman, would they also benefit financially from these fees, or would it just be the Iranian side?
The Iranians have said it's up to you. They said, look, actually the Iranians would prefer to do it with Oman. And by the way, Iran-Omani relations have traditionally been the best out of all the countries in the Persian Gulf. I mean, in this war, Oman did help the United States to a degree. And the Iranians are not happy about that. But in the 1980s, when these countries all supported Saddam Hussein and the United States, and the Soviet Union, by the way, also supported Saddam, Oman had the best of relations with Iran of all these countries. They were giving a couple of $100 billion to Saddam to kill Iranians. Oman, they kept good relations with Iran. And since then, that's been the case. And even before the revolution, the relationship between Iran and Oman has always been pretty good. So the Iranians are saying that, look, we want to be in this together, and you can benefit from it 50-50, depending on what involvement you have, 25-75, or nothing. But we'd rather you be a part of it. However, if you, for whatever reason, under American pressure, or for whatever other reason, you refrain from being part of this, we're going to control the Strait of Hormuz. So either with you or without you, we're going to maintain control over the Strait of Hormuz.
And I wonder if you can, from as much as you know anyway, from the perspective of the Omani side, what is the pros and cons of either going ahead and working with Iran and making America angry, or giving into the pressure and make America happy? What would that do to Iran? What is their pro and con going either direction?
Oman wants to deal. Oman wants to be a part of this process, this authority over the Strait of Hormuz, because it will benefit from it. And Oman is, compared to some of the other countries in the Persian Gulf, it has fewer natural resources. So if they have the ability to take fees, or even if they don't, because of the fact that they signed an international convention that Iran didn't. And by the way, nowadays, what are international conventions when you can just wage wars against countries? Everything is being undermined. But even if Oman doesn't want to benefit directly because of its signing an international convention, Iran could help it benefit indirectly. So Oman would like to be a part of this process. It gives it greater weight. It gives it more. It makes it more important. But of course, they fear Trump, because Trump, he might just decide to bomb them, destroy their country. I mean, one day he bombs Nigeria. The other day he threatens to take. He threatens Panama. He threatens Canada. Why shouldn't they be afraid of him? He murdered Ayatollah Khamenei. He slaughtered all our school children in Minab and the teenage girls who were playing volleyball in I forgot the name of the city, but so when Trump La Mer in the city of La Mer, when Trump does this sort of thing, obviously they're going to be afraid of him. One other thing that I think is important, and that is that